Welcome to the Wellbeing Podcast, where every episode is a step towards a healthier, happier you. Let's grow, thrive, and shine together. Don't forget to subscribe and like the Wellbeing Podcast, share your thoughts, and let us know in the comments what topics you'd love to hear about in future episodes. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something I know a lot of us think about: work-life balance. We've got a fascinating academic paper exploring how different cultures approach work-life balance and a research report from the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, that's all about tackling workplace challenges and finding real-world solutions. Buckle up because this is going to be a journey.
I think a lot of people assume work-life balance is just about dividing your hours equally between work and personal life. But it's so much more nuanced than that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. In fact, the first thing that jumped out at me from the research was how much the definition of work-life balance has evolved. It's not about rigid schedules, but finding a dynamic fit between your various roles and aspirations.
Exactly. It's a feeling, a state of harmony that comes from aligning your values, priorities, and actions across all areas of your life.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all equation. What feels balanced for one person might feel completely off for someone else. And even for the same person, that balance point can shift depending on what's happening in their life. I know for me, when I was finishing my dissertation work, pretty much took over everything. But later, when I started traveling, leisure time became much more important. It all depends on your values and what you're striving for at that moment. What about you? Have you experienced shifts in your own work-life balance over time?
Oh, absolutely. I think we all go through those phases where one area of life might demand more attention than others. What's fascinating here is that the research actually identifies 8 different domains that can be impacted by our work lives. We often think of it as just work versus family, but it's actually a lot more complex than that.
8 domains. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Mhm.
Lay it on me.
So in addition to work and family, you've got your health, household responsibilities, friendships, education or personal development, romantic relationships, community involvement, and leisure time.
Wow. 8 is a lot. Do you think they're all equally important, or do some tend to hold more weight than others?
Well, that's where individual values and circumstances come into play. What matters most to you? For someone, really career-driven work might take center stage, while someone else might prioritize family above all else. The key is recognizing that all these domains exist and that they can all be affected by how we manage our work lives.
It's a really helpful framework for thinking about it. But with so many areas to consider, it can feel overwhelming. How do we even begin to figure out if things are actually in balance?
Well, this is where the fit and balance perspective comes in.
Hmm.
Essentially, it suggests that achieving balance is about having enough resources to meet the demands in your life. Think of it like a scale. On one side, you have all the demands pulling on your time and energy, and on the other side, you have the resources you can draw on to meet those demands.
I like that analogy. So let me ask you this. Thinking about your own life right now, what are some of the biggest demands you're facing both at work and outside of work? Take a minute to really consider what's pulling at your time and energy.
And while we're all dealing with a unique set of demands, the research highlights 3 specific work demands that are particularly influential: your workload, the number of hours you work per week, and the amount of overtime you're doing. These can significantly tip the scales if you're not careful.
Speaking of overtime, there was one finding in the research that I found really surprising. It said that overtime doesn't always have a negative impact on work-life balance. I have to admit that one threw me for a loop.
I know, right? It seems counterintuitive. But when you dig deeper, it makes sense. The key factor is whether you choose to work those extra hours or if they feel forced upon you.
So if you're passionate about a project or you have a specific goal in mind, those extra hours might not feel as draining. It's when you feel pressured or resentful that overtime starts to negatively affect your well-being.
Right. Exactly. It's about control and agency. When you feel in control of your schedule and you're working towards something that matters to you, overtime can be manageable. But when it feels imposed or never ending, it's a different story. So it's not just about the number of hours, but the context surrounding those hours.
That makes so much sense. It's not just about the demands themselves, but also the resources we have to manage them.
Hmm.
And speaking of resources, the research highlight a couple of key ones that can really help us navigate those demands: supervisor support and job autonomy. What's fascinating to me is that these are things that are often within our control as individuals.
Absolutely. Having a supportive supervisor who understands your needs and is willing to be flexible can be a game changer. And having autonomy in your work, the ability to make decisions and manage your own time, can also significantly reduce stress. Imagine having a supervisor who trusts you to get the job done and gives you the freedom to manage your own schedule. That kind of support and flexibility can make a huge difference in how you experience those work demands.
I couldn't agree more. I remember a time when I had a boss who was incredibly supportive. They genuinely cared about my life outside of work and trusted me to manage my own workload. It made a world of difference in my overall well-being and productivity.
And, this is where cultural differences come into play as well. The research paper found some really interesting variations in how different cultures approach work-life balance. For example, in France and Italy, parental status was actually positively associated with work-life balance.
We really? So having kids actually made people feel more balanced? That seems to go against everything we hear here.
I know, it's fascinating, isn't it? It suggests that cultural factors like strong social and family support systems can play a significant role in shaping our experiences. In those countries, having access to affordable childcare parental leave policies and a societal expectation that family comes first might contribute to parents feeling more supported and less stressed.
So it's not just about individual choices, but also about the environment and the support systems we have in place. I wonder, do you think the culture you live in has influenced how you perceive work-life balance?
That's such a great question, and I'm curious to know how our listeners would answer that as well. What about you?
Hmm, that's a good one, I think. I think for me, the emphasis on individual achievement and hustle culture definitely plays a role. It can be easy to get caught up in the idea that we need to be working all the time to be successful.
That's a really insightful point. It seems like there's often this unspoken pressure to prioritize work above all else.
Yeah, and I think that can make it even harder to set boundaries and prioritize our well-being. Which brings us to our next question. Knowing that culture plays such a huge role, what can we do regardless of where we live to create more balance in our lives?
Well, a SHRM report really dives into this, and I have to say it's packed with practical advice.
Hmm.
It emphasizes that organizations have a big responsibility here. They need to foster a culture that genuinely supports work-life balance and that starts with having the right policies in place.
Right, things like flexible work arrangements, generous paid time off resources for childcare or elder care. Those can all make a huge difference. But it sounds like it's not just about ticking boxes and offering those perks.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture where people actually feel comfortable using those benefits without fear of judgment or repercussions. It's about setting realistic expectations and modeling healthy boundaries from the top down.
I'm thinking back to the reports section on supervisor training. They had some great examples of how managers can help create a more supportive environment, like encouraging managers to check in with their team members about their well-being, not just their deadlines, and to model healthy boundaries themselves, like not sending emails late at night or expecting immediate responses on weekends.
Those are such powerful examples
Yep.
because actions speak louder than words, right? If your manager is constantly working late and sending emails at all hours, it sends a very clear message about what's expected, even if the company says they value work-life balance.
It's like that old saying, do as I say, not as I do. That never really works, does it? It creates this sense of hypocrisy, and employees can see right through that.
Exactly. It erodes trust and can make people feel like they have to sacrifice their well-being to get ahead. The report really stressed the need for clear and consistent communication from leadership about what work-life balance means in that specific organization and how employees are expected to behave. It's about aligning actions with words and creating an environment where people feel genuinely supported.
Okay, so we've talked about the company's role, the manager's role. But what about our role in all of this? I mean, we can't just sit back and wait for our companies to create a perfect workplace, can we?
That's the million-dollar question, and the answer is a resounding no. We have agency, we have choices. Even if our workplace isn't ideal, we still have the power to shape our own work-life balance.
I love that. So it's not about waiting for permission or for things to be perfect. It's about taking ownership and setting boundaries for ourselves. Like maybe deciding to not check work emails after a certain hour, or dedicating Sundays to family time no matter what.
Precisely. It's about defining what balance means for you and making choices that reflect those values. And it might mean having some tough conversations with your boss or colleagues about your needs and limits.
That makes sense.
Uh,
But those conversations can feel intimidating. Do you have any advice for how to approach them effectively?
Well, first and foremost, remember that you have a right to set boundaries. It's not selfish. It's essential for your well-being. And remember that you're not alone in this. Many people struggle with work-life balance, and your manager might be more understanding than you think.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own heads and assume the worst, isn't it? Like that our boss will think we're not committed or that we'll be penalized for setting limits.
Absolutely. But often those fears are unfounded. Clear communication is key. Explain why these boundaries are important to you and how they'll ultimately benefit your work. Frame it as a win-win situation.
And maybe even have some specific suggestions in mind, right? Like,
Yeah.
instead of expecting immediate responses to emails after hours, could we agree to a policy of responding within one business day?
Exactly. The more specific and solution-oriented you can be, the better. And remember, it's an ongoing conversation. As your life changes and your needs evolve, you might need to revisit those boundaries and have those conversations again.
It's not a one-time fix. It's a constant process of adjustment and communication. So we've talked a lot about setting boundaries, but the SHRM report also emphasized the importance of self-care. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. Self-care is crucial for maintaining well-being and resilience, especially when we're juggling multiple demands. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating well? Are you making time for things that bring you joy and help you recharge? These things are not luxuries, they're necessities.
It's so easy to let those things slide when we're feeling overwhelmed, but they're actually the things that help us stay grounded and energized, aren't they?
Precisely. Think of it like this. If you're constantly running on empty tank, you're not going to be able to show up fully for anything your work, your family, or yourself.
It's like trying to drive a car with an empty tank.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to run out of gas and break down.
Exactly. So prioritizing self-care is not selfish. It's an investment in your overall well-being and your ability to manage those competing demands effectively.
Okay, so it sounds like creating work-life balance is this multifaceted endeavor. It's about company culture, supportive managers, and proactive employees who prioritize their well-being and set boundaries.
That's a great summary. It's not about finding a perfect formula, but rather about finding what works for you at this particular moment in your life.
Right, and recognizing that it's an ongoing process, not a destination. One thing that keeps popping into my head is this idea of the ideal work-life balance. Does it even exist? Or is it more about finding what works for you at this particular moment in your life?
That's such an interesting question, and to be honest, the research didn't offer a clear-cut answer. It seems like the ideal is a constantly moving target, shifting with our priorities, circumstances, and even our cultural context. What feels balanced today might feel completely off kilter a year from now.
So instead of striving for this elusive ideal, maybe it's more about embracing the fluidity and being adaptable to the ever-changing demands of life. What do you think?
I think you're spot on. It's about regularly checking in with yourself, reevaluating your needs and priorities, and making adjustments as needed. And it's about giving yourself grace when things aren't perfect because, let's face it, life is messy.
That's such an important reminder. There are always going to be unexpected deadlines, sick kids, family emergencies. It's how we navigate those curveballs that truly matters.
I love that you brought that up. It's about resilience, about having coping mechanisms in place for when those inevitable challenges arise.
And maybe that's where having a strong support system comes in. Who are the people you can lean on when things get tough? Having that network of friends, family, or even colleagues who can offer a listening ear or a helping hand can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And it's not just about receiving support, it's about giving it too. When we support others, we often find that we feel more balanced and fulfilled ourselves. It's this beautiful reciprocal cycle.
I love that. It's not just about me, but about cultivating a culture of support and well-being in all areas of our lives.
Mm.
This conversation has really gotten me thinking about this tension between wanting a fulfilling career and also wanting a rich and meaningful life outside of work. Does it always have to be a trade-off? Or can we truly have both?
That's the age-old question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. The research doesn't offer a simple solution either.
So it's not as simple as just loving your job. There's more to it than that.
Right. It seems that the key is finding that sweet spot where you feel challenged and engaged by your work, but also have the time and energy to invest in other aspects of your life.
So it's about setting those boundaries, prioritizing our well-being, and making intentional choices about how we spend our time and energy. And sometimes that might mean making some tough decisions like turning down a promotion, setting limits on our work hours, or even changing careers entirely.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what truly matters to you and making choices that align with those values. And that can look different for everyone. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
It's so helpful to hear all of this discussed so openly and honestly, but I think it's time to bring in a real-world perspective. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll be talking to someone who's actually navigated these challenges firsthand and created a thriving career and a fulfilling personal life.
I can't wait to hear what they have to say. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring the complexities of work-life balance, and now we have a special guest who's not only studied this topic extensively, but also embodies it in their own life. They've managed to build a successful career while also prioritizing their family hobbies and well-being.
I'm so excited to dive into their insights and learn from their experience. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We've been talking about all the different factors that contribute to work-life balance, company culture, personal boundaries, supportive supervisors, self-care. It's a lot to juggle. From your perspective, what's been the biggest game changer for you in creating that sense of harmony?
For me, it all boils down to boundaries. Learning to set clear boundaries between work and the rest of my life has been absolutely transformative.
I think a lot of us struggle with that, especially in today's always connected world.
I hear you. I used to be that person who was always on, answering emails late at night, working weekends, feeling like I had to be available 24/7. I thought that was just the price of success.
It's a common misconception, isn't it? That we have to sacrifice our personal lives to achieve our professional goals.
It is. But over time, I realized that always being on was actually making me less productive and less happy. I was constantly burnt out, my relationships were suffering, and I was missing out on precious moments with my loved ones.
So what was the turning point for you? What made you decide to make a change?
I finally hit a wall. I realized that something had to change or I was headed for a major crash. That's when I started setting some ground rules for myself. I decided no more work email after dinner, and Sundays became strictly for family time.
It sounds like setting those boundaries was a big step. Was it difficult to implement them at first?
I'll be honest, it was a bit of an adjustment, both for me and the people around me. Old habits die hard. But once I got used to it, and the people in my life got used to it, the benefits were incredible.
What were some of the biggest changes you noticed?
Well, first and foremost, I felt so much calmer and more focused. Having those dedicated blocks of time for work and for personal life allowed me to be fully present in each moment. I was no longer constantly switching gears and feeling frazzled.
That makes sense. The research actually talks about this concept of psychological availability. When we're constantly toggling between work and personal life, it takes a toll on our mental energy and focus. But when we have clear boundaries, we can truly be present and engaged in whatever we're doing at that moment.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, my work actually improved. Because I was more rested and had more clarity, I was able to get more done in less time. It was a win-win situation.
That's so inspiring to hear. It's a great reminder that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It actually allows us to show up more fully in all areas of our lives.
And it creates a ripple effect. When we prioritize our well-being, it positively impacts the people around us as well.
So true. Now, for those of us who might be struggling to set those boundaries, do you have any advice?
Well, first of all, be patient with yourself. It takes time to break old habits and establish new ones. And don't be afraid to communicate your boundaries clearly and respectfully to your colleagues and your boss. Let them know when you're available and when you're not.
Communication is key. It's so important to advocate for your needs and to help others understand your boundaries.
Exactly. And sometimes it's about starting small. You don't have to overhaul your entire life overnight. Maybe start by setting aside 1 hour a day for something non-work related, whether it's reading, going for a walk, or just spending time with loved ones. Little by little, you can build those boundaries and reclaim your time and energy.
I love those practical tips. It's about making those incremental changes and celebrating those small wins along the way. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about your journey with work-life balance?
Just this work-life balance is not a destination, it's an ongoing journey. There will be times when you feel more balanced than others, and that's okay. The key is to keep checking in with yourself, be adaptable to changing circumstances, and prioritize your well-being. Remember, you deserve to thrive both personally and professionally.
That's such a powerful message. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today.
Yes, thank you. This has been such an inspiring and enlightening conversation.
And thank you for joining us on this deep dive into work-life balance. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and feel empowered to create more balance in your own life. Remember, it's about progress, not perfection, and it's about finding what works for you. Thanks for listening to the Wellbeing Podcast. Take care, stay inspired, and see you next time.